for Americans to feel deep resentment and a thirst for vengeance against the people who terrorized our nation. The fact that the guilty happen to be Muslims has, over the years, created among some Americans a fear and mistrust of anyone belonging to that religious group. On Sunday, September 10th, on the eve of that 5th anniversary, we had a frank discussion with representatives from three faiths about where they've been and where we need to go as a community. I think you'll want to hear what they had to say. That's why you can watch a rebroadcast of that television show. That's Tuesday, September 12th at 7 p.m. right here on KACV, your public television station. Good evening and welcome to a community conversation. This is the first of 4 television programs to be broadcast in the coming months by KACV and sponsored by Amarillo College. Each program will focus on a different topic. Tonight, we've gathered people from across our community to discuss the terrorist attacks we now know as 9/11. As we approach the 5th anniversary, it is our intent to meet here on this neutral ground to take a look back at our community in terms of what we've learned in the past 5 years and where we need to go from here. We begin with a look at the events as they unfolded on September 11th, 2001.
There was Flight 11, which was a Boeing 767 en route from Boston to Los Angeles.
Rudy Giuliani now says, and this is a direct quote, there have been a tremendous number of lives lost.
It was the news of the day, the only subject being discussed by anyone, anywhere. We couldn't drag ourselves away from the television screen. Word of the attacks on New York and Washington saturated the airwaves. People from across the world watched and listened anxiously as word of the devastation seemed to mount.
He said, quote, and this is Tom Daschle and Trent Lott speaking in one voice today, not two voices, speaking in one voice.
The first mention of an airplane hitting the World Trade Center began to filter in just after 8:45 that morning. It was the North Tower. Air traffic controllers soon learned that commercial jetliners were being hijacked. After warnings were issued to some pilots, a United flight apparently avoided hijacking by leaving the runway and returning to the gate. At 9:03, the second plane crashed into the World Trade Center, taking with it 7 floors of the South Tower. 100 people working inside died instantly. 15 minutes later, the Federal Aviation Administration shut down all New York City airports. 2 airliners called off all takeoffs nationwide, and a warning went out to the doomed United Airlines Flight 93, telling the pilots to secure the cockpit doors. Just before 9:30 that morning, the FAA halts all takeoffs nationwide, and CNN begins to report that the attacks are the work of terrorists. At 9:37, American Flight 77 crashes into the Pentagon. The White House is evacuated at 9:45. And at the same time, a senior manager of the FAA, his first day on the job, orders a nationwide shutdown of the entire air traffic system. For the first time in history, all flights in the U.S., including military, are grounded. By 9:59, the news was getting worse. The South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. At 10:03, after a struggle between passengers and hijackers, Flight 93 crashes into a Pennsylvania countryside. And at 10:28, the North Tower of the World Trade Center gave way.
All we know today is that tens of thousands of people worked in that complex that has been destroyed. And I hate to say it this way, but this may be the day that America's luck ran out.
By morning's end, more than 3,000 people in America were dead, many of them from different countries, representing diverse religious and political beliefs. By morning's end, we were all awakened to the reality that the United States was no longer immune to terrorism.
So as we remember back on the morning of September 11th, 2001, we know it seemed justifiable that day to feel anger, hatred, and mistrust toward our enemy. The fact that the guilty were Muslims and citizens of Arab nations served only to fuel a common belief in our country that followers of Islam are uniformly misguided, violent, and at odds with Western values, even those Muslims who are our neighbors. Just a few weeks after the attack, KACV broadcast a show similar to tonight's in which we gathered members of different faiths in order to foster open dialogue. I was the host of that show also, and it was a difficult hour. Honestly, no one seemed willing or eager to talk. I think we weren't sure what to say. It was eye-opening and disturbing to realize that we had lived in the same city for years and yet we didn't know each other. Now, 5 years removed, we've gathered once again people of 3 different faiths, hoping to have an honest dialogue about what makes us different, but perhaps more importantly, what we have in common. So let me begin by introducing our guest tonight. To my left is Dr. Howie Batson. He's senior minister of First Baptist Church here in Amarillo. And to Dr. Batson's left, we have Dr. Syed Tariq Anwar. He's a professor of business at West Texas A&M University. He is a Pakistani American and a Muslim, and he's been living in the U.S. since 1980. Then we have Steve Gens. He's retired now, but he has for years been very active in our community. Among other things, he's been on the symphony board and has served as president of Temple B'nai Israel. He's here tonight, however, to speak from his own point of view as someone who's a member of the Jewish religion. And then we have Carol Nicklaus. She's a professor here at Amarillo College. She teaches humanities and philosophy and is the organizer of a lecture series on Islam, and also is organizing a special series of workshops this fall on understanding religious diversity. So nice to have you here. And finally, John Kanelis, who is my partner in journalism tonight. Most of you know him. He's editorial page editor for the Amarillo Globe News. For nearly 12 years, John has managed the daily production of the editorial and op-ed pages of the Globe News. So John rolls his eyes when I say this, but you truly have your hand on the pulse of what people in the Panhandle, I think, are thinking. So thanks for being here, John. You know, 9/11 was much like December 7th, 1941. Everybody knows where they were, and we all have our stories. Everybody has their story of 9/11. But I think it might be really important to begin tonight by letting Dr. Anwar talk about his experience that morning as a Pakistani American who is Muslim, because I've heard you say that the relationships you formed here, being at WT, really paid off for you that morning.
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for inviting me here. It was a very sad day. I came to my office and I saw 2 huge buildings coming down. Could not believe. I've been in this country for the last 26 years, and the whole ballgame changed. At the time, I was the department head of the management marketing. And within 30 minutes, I believe, Dr. Long, he was the president at the time, Russell Long, he came with a Globe News reporter, and the first question he asked me was, Anwar, I hope you are safe, and I would like to make sure that everything is okay. I think it was a wonderful feeling when a head of an institution comes to you and talks about, and I think anybody could have done the same thing or would have done the same thing, because this was a very serious stuff. United States never ever interacted or encountered this kind of a change behavior. And then it's very interesting that within I think 30 minutes, I got a call from one of my students. He had taken my classes in 1988-89. I forgot his name at that time, and the first question, the first thing he told me was, Dr. Anwar, my name is John. I was your student. I'm worried about you. I would like to come to WT. I would like to stand outside your door. I'm not sure you are safe today. And I think I will never forget these 2 things happening on the same day. That shows that on the one hand, we were seeing huge disaster in New York, but on the other hand, the community was also very well connected to each other. Imagine, never seeing a student after 15 years, he calls you and the first thing he says, I would like to protect you, I'm your friend today. I think that was a very big deal to me on that day.
Did you feel, were you afraid? Did you feel safe?
I don't think so, because I'm in WT since 1987, and my students came to me, but you could feel there was a little gap. And some of the students who did not know me, I could look into their eyes and I could read their faces and eyes, and the first question I think they had for me, although it was not verbalized, that, you are an outsider. What are you doing here? And we as a country, I think we need to watch you, because it's a problem. Because interestingly, Within 3 weeks, I went to Australia. I took a flight from Dallas, and I think from Houston to LA. Just 1 minute before the flight, they changed my seat, and they asked me that, Anwar, you need to move to the next, front seats. And of course, they put me next to a flight marshal, and because that whole ball game was changed. And then at each and every level, I think I was stopped, I was checked, but I did not feel uncomfortable because they were doing their job.
Mm-hmm. Let me go to Dr. Batson, because well, we ask our viewers to send questions in before the show, and I'm not going to show them yet, but a common question that came quite often was a common question that I bet you heard from members of your congregation or your friends, and it's just a kind of a simple question with, why do bad things happen to good people? We have this loving God that we all believe in. How could this happen?
Well, that is a huge question, of course, that humanity's been asking forever. You think about Psalm 23, where the psalmist says, why is the evil man fat, and why does he experience no pain? We all like a very predictable world and a very predictable creator, and we've enjoyed that predictable world here in America for a long time. And if you think about the creation sagas, creation comes out of this watery chaos. We have this watery chaos, and Psalm 46 reflects back when the world is going back to that chaos before orderly creation. And so in the 46th Psalm, the mountains are slipping into the heart of the sea, and the waters are roaring and foaming, and the earth is quaking, and the psalmist is afraid, and finally he just has to be still and know that God is. What we learn as we read sacred text of many religions is that it rains on the just and the unjust, and bad things happen to good people and to evil people, and we all want a firm moral equation where if we are good, this will be the result. And life doesn't give us a firm moral equation on this side of creation. Now, many of us like to hope in the next world that everyone will be held accountable except for the grace extended by God, and that people do not get away with evil deeds. But for the time being, since the moment of creation, evil things will happen to good people.
John?
Professor Anwar, you spoke of an experience you had in which you were profiled as an airline passenger. I want to ask you, and I guess anybody can answer this question as well, but what do you and what do we think of the policy of profiling people who look like they might be a potential terrorist?
It's a pretty difficult and tough situation. My answer is that we are all part of the equation. We are going through a transition. United States never ever had this kind of a situation. We do not know how to react, how to act. If you look at the Europeans, they have been dealing with this for a long time. So I think that's why when you try to profile somebody, early days people were kind of uncomfortable, but they were all, some of them, they thought that it's part of, their job, or if somebody is profiling you, it's a little bit difficult. But if I'm profiled, if I go somewhere, in these days, I don't feel uncomfortable. Previously, maybe I could have, but not anymore. Reason, I give them benefit of the doubt. If a flight attendant or if behind the counter, if somebody, I think they are doing their job. You really do not have, any criteria, and of course, you don't want to miss your flight. So my suggestion is just keep quiet and be obedient, be truthful. You have to comply with the rules, and I believe they are doing their job. But if it goes a little bit beyond, then it's a problem. And it has happened to some of my friends.
I'd like to talk about our vocabulary and how it's changed since 9/11. I don't know whether we were naive or uneducated or arrogant or whatever we were as Americans, but, my biggest wake-up call on 9/11, and I'm embarrassed to admit it, is that all of a sudden I realized that terrorists were, oh my goodness, they're intelligent, and they are well-organized, and they are living legally among us. And that was the scariest part to me, because I thought before, that, I don't know, they're just these people that, don't bother me because I live right here, or whatever I thought. But, think of all the words we have now that we didn't have before, jihadist, all the, everything that we know now. And so, in your experience, Carol, talk to me about what we've learned since then and how naive we were before then.
All right. Having studied Islam and taught it in several things, I really felt like it was very misunderstood. And I myself went through this process of realizing things that, the first thing I realized was that Allah is not another God. It's the Arabic word for the God that we have.
That all three faiths believe in, the God of Abraham.
And Islam considers itself to be part of this development. We go back to Abraham, just like Judaism and Christianity. The difference that I found to be interesting was that Muhammad considered himself to be a prophet, and in many ways fulfilled that role. I was also interested in the fact that the birth of Jesus is part of the Quran, and those people of Islamic persuasion see Jesus also as a prophet, but not a divinity. They have a series of, I guess we can call it, they have an ethical, albeit sort of scattered belief in certain ways of behavior. And so I realized there are many things we have in common, and many things we take for granted that we just possess in our own religions, and others do too. So.
I haven't gotten you talking yet, Steve Gans. Do you feel Dr. Anwar is certainly a minority religion in our region? You also are a member of the Jewish faith, which is minority in our religion. When does that appear most evident to you?
I'm not sure that being singled out as a minority in the numerous small communities in which I have been, if you might say, a distinct minority, where the community is very small, and I can certainly relate with Anwar and his community being small, because I have, from my own experience, had the training that has allowed me to go out into the community and talk with the community. I've had a lot of experience talking with Sunday school classes at the various Christian churches here. I've taught for a number of years the Judaism portion of for the Catholic deacons in their program, and so to me, the fundamentals are really pretty simple, and they're there. And even my experience in the military, it was what is the person, who is the person, do you do your job, do you contribute to your community, and that's not to say that I haven't felt from time to time very uncomfortable, and I do believe that there's bigotry on this earth, but I think it can be coped with quite adequately by being open and participating in the community.
Carol, I know that you've had, in the past year, and maybe beyond that, before that, I don't know, some workshops, am I correct, in studying Islam? Are people interested in that, or?
Yes, we had a lecture series on Islam. It was before 9/11.
Oh, okay.
But we had wonderful cooperation with the Islamic Center in Amarillo, and I took a group of women out for a Thursday afternoon event. It was one of their periods of praying 5 times a day, and so they, of course, began to pray and do that. They explained all of this to us before and afterwards. They were so helpful, and I just appreciated their help, and I've been able to call on people from the Islamic Center of Amarillo since then, and I think that it has helped understanding between the two. And we had a lot of, not a huge class, but we had a class that learned some new things about Islam, and for example, that the Quran is really only recognized as being the holy book if it's in Arabic. So part of what the majority of these women were doing were trying to learn Arabic, and we were impressed with their dedication.
I'd like to touch back on the vocabulary question that you asked, because vocabulary has got such a great deal to do with understanding. I think that the fundamental building block for a community such as we have here in Amarillo is understanding. If we understand, then we don't find ourselves in conflict with one another, or it probably is more of a debate than a conflict. But if you look at it from a point of view of vocabulary, we talk about tolerance, and I think that tolerance is a socio-political term. I think that what we're really discussing here is pluralism. And I think that's more of a philosophical term, and I think that's a good approach. We have those on one side who want to be exclusive, and those on the other side who want to be inclusive, and then remarkably in the middle we have the pluralists, and they're the centrists that we seem to be craving in our social, political, economic, and religious lives. So if you look at all three of us here are representing religious faiths. We're all, to use a phrase that Dr. Batson shared with me the other day, unapologetic about our religions. We're firm believers, but at the same time, we understand that God gave each of us a reason for being. You asked me about do I ever feel bigotry or some kind of pressure. I think the only time that I've really felt uncomfortable is when people have misunderstood the chosen. Well, the Hebrews were chosen to receive the Torah, and that became a fundamental building block of the Abrahamic-based religions. And the Baptists were chosen to receive something, and the Muslims were chosen to receive something. And we're all on this road to get to an end point, and we're just using a different avenue of approach. And the idea of pluralism, of being able to sit down in a small community like this and say, well, let me tell you how I look at this, and Dr. Anwar says to me, well, Steve, that's great, but we have this perspective, and we both learn. And then along comes Dr. Batson, and he said, let me tell the two of you something. And then it spreads out. And I can go back to my people, and I can say, wow, I had a learning experience. Let me tell you.
Let me have Dr. Batson talk about it. You talk, and then I'll say what I want you to talk about if you don't cover it.
Well, I thought about this question a lot, and my idea is this. If we all have to think that every religion is equally valid to be kind to each other, then the world is in trouble. I think that each of us could think that our own expression of faith is even the valid expression, at the same time respect and love and pray for our neighbor. So that if I had a neighbor who worships a rock, let's say, now all of us, the three of us would agree that his expression of faith is a rock. The three of us would agree that his expression of faith is not as informed as our expressions of faith. And even though we wouldn't think he had an equally valid path, I wouldn't think his path was equally valid to Christianity or to the Islamic faith, and he wouldn't think it was equally valid to the Jewish faith, our neighbor who worships a rock. But especially as Americans, with the separation wall between church and state, and Baptists have had a good role in establishing that wall, I have to be even willing to fight and die for my neighbor's right to worship a rock, even if I think he's very misguided. So there's an amount of appreciating our neighbor and praying for our neighbor and loving our neighbor and serving our neighbor, even if we think that our neighbor's on the wrong path. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If we wait until we think we have equal paths, we'll never be kind to each other. So that I can respect everybody on this panel and yet disagree about some tenets of theology with each person on the panel.
Well, and I want
but
to
that
point
doesn't
out
make them unimportant to me.
I want to point out that you've said that this is nothing new, that people say this country was founded on freedom of religion, when in fact...
It really wasn't. Folks who came to the New World wanted freedom of religion, but they wanted freedom of religion for themselves. So that if you were in New England and you were a Baptist and you go the first day the First Baptist Church of Boston was opening up, they had nailed the door shut and the Baptists couldn't get into worship here in what came to be known as America. The Congregationalists were controlling that area, or if you go to Virginia, it was the Anglicans, and there was a Baptist pastor by the name of Dave Thomas, who was an elderly man, and the Anglicans in Virginia would chill him and beat him up from time to time because he was preaching Baptist doctrine. And so he hired an associate pastor by the name of Amos Thompson, who had big biceps, a real muscular, brawny fella. And when he knew that the Anglicans were coming to beat him up, he put the muscular associate pastor in the pulpit, and they let him go ahead and preach the Baptist doctrine and not pull him out and whip him. And so Baptists fought long and hard for the expression of each person or each faith to be free in America. And so a Baptist may have a very narrow view of the path of salvation through the person of Christ Jesus, but we will fight and die for our neighbors' rights to worship as their own conscience might dictate for them to worship. And so the idea that everybody came to America and everybody had a free party with religion is not true if you look at American history. And the Baptists were often on the short end of that stick. And the problem has been, as Christians and Baptists especially have become a very popular religion, Baptists being the largest Protestant denomination in America, we have forgotten that the stick of the government was once used on us, and so we are tempted to pick up the stick of the state and begin to coerce others into believing and expressing their faith like we do in various places. And so a Baptist who knows his Baptist history will defend any man's or any woman's right to worship, whatever, whomever, however she chooses. Then we'll go across the street and try to convince them otherwise and try to get them to worship Christ. But that's the way it goes.
I learned a great phrase from Dr. Anwar just a few days ago. We were talking, and he made a comment about, and I don't remember your exact words, Anwar, but it was something like, everybody calls the United States the melting pot because everybody came from everywhere here. I love it. He calls it a tossed salad. And I think that that's a great evaluation, a great perception of what we are. Because if you were to draw this down into sociological groups that were not religious groups, if you go out for an evening and there's an array of different backgrounds there, the doctors are in a corner talking to the doctors, the dentists are in a corner talking to the dentists, the lawyers most assuredly are talking only to the lawyers. Everybody has simply got to learn that if you're part of this tossed salad, you got to get in there with the celery, the radishes, and the lettuce.
Let me go to our viewer questions because I don't want to. We're getting on our time, and I just go for the first three because all at once, and then we'll talk about it, as Matt Lauer would say, on the other side. So can we put those up? Yeah. Okay. Can we really accomplish greater understanding, or is it safer to pretend our Islamic community doesn't exist? These are coming from viewers. Is it true that Muslim Americans tend to support or accept any Muslim nation or group first, and the U.S. second? And then finally, if Muslim is a religion of peace, why is there so much violence among the Sunnis and the Shiites? So where do you want to start talking about that? Dr. Anwar, do you want to talk?
Yes, I will take this first. I think, first of all, before I take these questions, we are going through phase number 2. Phase number 1 was immediately after 9/11, and then we did not know how to act and react. But that in the phase number 2, now people are coming to their terms, and they understand that, there are other immigrants in this world and in this country, and so how do we deal with them? And so this is where, your point is very well valid, and yours, and the problem is that still we do not know how to deal with phase number 2 because I don't think we are doing a good job in terms of training our communities, because people need to coexist. As long as you coexist, you are peaceful, but if you do not have any idea, and back to the questions, I think barely 1 or 2% Muslims, what we call, you can call them terrorists, you can call them radicals. 99%, people all over the world, Muslim community, they are very peaceful, peace-loving people. I'll make one quick analogy, and take any religions or take any groups. In fact, when I talk to my colleagues nationwide, the first thing It doesn't matter if you are very rich or very poor. The first thing comes to your mind every day, how to feed your families, how to put food on the table. It doesn't matter if you are from the Jewish community, Muslim community, Christian community. And so that's why I think many people do not understand that Muslims, they work hard just like any other religion, and they would like to, be peaceful citizens. The problem happens, and that's where John's comment was excellent, and that was, when you go somewhere and then you seek some kind of, in these days, the media has, and there's a lot of research going on in this area. There are two new words coming out, and it's called unconscious bias. In fact, courts are also buying this very much. Unconscious bias is getting into, it came out of EEOC, equal opportunity, all these things. And people may not be aware, but they may have some unconscious bias. They may not be aware that they may be discriminating. So when it goes deep down, it has very deep roots. And I think that's where it's going to take a long time. And in phase number 2, how to educate. The first thing comes, if I have a new neighbor or if I have a new friend, the first thing comes to their mind, or if I travel, who's this man? What is he doing here? And although, if I go to any retail shop without this jacket and tie, sometimes I'm followed. But then at the end of the day, you have to come to your terms. Why? Because I don't want to waste my time. But I think this may create a problem. And you can see what happened in England, United Kingdom in the last few years, because, Tony Blair's policies of multiculturalism, and then they also wanted to have integrationist model. It has huge conflict. So my answer to these questions, I think we still do not know how to go through the transition, because the support structure, for example, many law enforcement in this country, they do not know how to bridge a gap between different cultures. And that creates a problem.
You've been talking about how your own culture, I've heard you talk about how your own culture makes a mistake in having its priority in education and,
yes,
and not other places. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. Yes, since I'm in academia for the last 22, 23 years, I cannot name any Pakistani, any Indian who's majoring in philosophy, history, music. Everybody would like to go for medicine, engineering, because mom and dad, they want you to be prosperous. Because back home, these majors do not have any value. So it's our fault as an immigrant, as a minority. I don't think we do a good job. I'll tell you, if I try to convince one of my friends, son, okay, if you like music, go for it. But there was a huge opposition from his family. Why? Because they don't want their son so. And then secondly, immigrants, especially from South Asia and East Asia, they are not becoming part of the political process. You tell me how many people are running for local councillorship, or how many congressmen you have. It's going to take another 30, 40 years to get to that now. The Hispanic community is doing an excellent job. They are part of the political process. We are not. We are left behind. Whose fault is it? Our fault.
Even serving on civic organizations.
Yes.
I'm on boards, and I'm on no boards with any Pakistani Americans,
That's right.
anybody.
And the whole thing is because they are too busy. In fact, I do not have any children. But I see my colleagues, I don't see. Everybody is doing medicine, they are doing engineering, they would love to have good jobs.
You know what everybody's saying now? Well, I'm busy too.
Yes. So basically, I think a political process that is to be included, to be part of, I told my students one day that I would love to go for someday to run for the local or to run for the Congress. But the chances are I'm going to lose big time because I don't have a platform. I don't have a platform, and that's where the problem is. Now in England, things are changing very fast. You have lots of members of parliament, and they are very well connected to each other. But that's a different ball game. But we are going through phase number 2, and phase number 3 hasn't arrived yet.
Carol, don't you think it's about relationship, though? Because if I don't know him, if he's not serving on my board with me, then I don't know who he is.
I think that is a problem, especially here in West Texas, because we're pretty generic. I think would be. But your focus on what students are majoring in, I think, allows me to seg into, if Muslims are religious, why is there so much violence between the Sunnis and the Shia? And I think that it has to do with the fact that, of course, there's the history of this. There's the separation of the Sunnis and then the Shia, because they believe that the prophet, or the succession of the prophet, should be hereditary, where the Sunnis do not, and so that began that major split. Well, let's look at them in Iraq. The problem there is that these groups have been tied up with the power. The Sunnis were the ones in power. They don't want to lose the power. And I think that's why they are being violent. And throughout the history of the world, we have used religion to legitimize a government policy. And the Shia are doing the same thing, exactly. You know, and we've done this. We've used religion to legitimize some of the things we've done. So I think they can be very religious people, but they can be used by governments, and I think that's certainly is the case there. So that's why they don't major in that. Most of these people, that it segs into another question, most of these people come from very poor situations, at least in one or two generations. And many of them, as Thomas Friedman calls it, comes from failed states. There were educated guys who flew into the towers, but there was no place for them to go.
That's right.
So I think that's part of the problem, is the economic and political structure that brings religion in for certain power struggles.
I have to tell you, Anwar, your story about why don't you major in music, why don't you major in philosophy? It was like my dad sitting next to me. I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy, and every time I would come home from college, he would say to me, I didn't see any ads in the newspaper for philosophers. What are you doing? And I used to tell him that in those years I could be quite idealistic, and I would say to him, well, it's guys like me that are going to save the world from people like you. But if you stop and think about the histories here, I mean, Judaism springs from tribal society. The Muslims spring from tribal society. At the end of World War I, France and Great Britain got together. There's a wonderful book called The Peace to End All Peace. I can't remember the name of the author, but this fellow describes in intense and excruciating detail how Great Britain and France redesigned the Middle East in such a fashion that it was bound to take these nations of tribal societies and put them in conflict with one another. And so it really isn't, in my opinion, for years, the Muslims, the Arabs, Jews, we lived all in the same countries. There were significant Jewish populations in Iran, in Iraq. The Arabs and Jews lived in what was then Palestine in a very amicable arrangement. Everybody got along fine until somebody stepped in and said, we have to draw political lines. We have to have these geopolitical boundaries so we can understand one another. And if you want to talk about differences, I mean, you have the Shia and the Sunnis. Judaism is not a monolithic religion. We have Orthodox Jews, we have conservative Jews, we have Reform Jews, we have Reconstructionist Jews, and there's another group that isn't a formal group in the sense of it being recognized as a religion. We have the Hasidic Jews. And when we get together and we talk about the conflict that exists within our own confines, we often say that if you get 5 Jews together in a room, you're going to get 8 opinions. There are differences of opinions, and they're all based on how we see things. But we seem to work them out because we have prevailed And we have lived for so many years in the diaspora. Jews have been spread across the world that we learned a certain amount of importance has to be attached to being able to adapt to what the modern culture is at where you are at that point in time, but without giving up our very important, sincere religious traditions. And I don't think that the people of the Middle East, I'm going to bunch everybody together, I don't think they've been given that chance. And when you have these kinds of situations, there's always somebody on the far, wherever, out on the locus of points of society that says, this is my opportunity. And that's where it comes apart.
Let me go to some more viewer questions. I hate to ask questions and then not use them on a show because then people don't, want to send me questions anymore. So I'll do 3 in a row, buddy. Why is open bigotry against Muslims being ignored and left unchallenged? Have Amarillo churches worked at all with our local synagogue and mosque? And do ministers have any responsibility to draw distinctions between Muslims and terrorists, or do they think it's a matter for politicians? Dr. Batson, do you want to address any of that?
I think that, first of all, the core problem is that many Christian ministers don't understand the Islamic faith themselves. If you went up to the average Protestant minister and said, give me the 5 basic tenets of the Muslim faith, they might struggle unless they'd recently had a course with Carol. And so I think it's important that ministers educate themselves so they can educate their people, because we all tend to put people in boxes, and if we just hear the word Islamic, we might think terrorist. But now if Anwar's my neighbor, then I think differently. You see, if he lives next door to me, which he doesn't, then we think differently if we have a relationship. But because the Muslim population in Amarillo is not that grand in scale, we really do have to have some education, and there is that unconscious bias if we're not careful, that it's okay to be a friend with a person that has Islamic faith, and you may not agree with their religion, but that's okay. They may make a great neighbor, and that does there's a very low degree that they're going to be a terrorist. I don't want anybody to think about somebody who burns a cross in an African American's yard as representative of Christianity.
But they say they are.
That person claims the power of the cross and claims Christianity under the banner of their hateful philosophy. And just like I wouldn't want anybody to say that's what a Christian is, a group of people who wear hoods and burn crosses in their neighbor's yard who's an African American, he doesn't want people to think that a terrorist represents the majority of folks who express the Muslim faith. And so, yes, it is important that you think differently of me than you think of the fellow who burns the crosses in your neighbor's yard. And so it's only fair that if I want that distinction, that I would help my congregation have the distinction that there's a difference between the great majority of peaceful Muslims and those that are terrorists. And I'm in no way endorsing terrorism or anything that the Muslims or any other faith might do that is destructive to innocent civilians under that flag of terrorism or under the banner of religion that is co-opted so often. But ministers should help the congregations make distinctions by educating themselves first, and then thinking about it, even within the umbrella of Christianity, there are a lot of distinctions that we want to distance ourselves from.
Okay, I wanted to get your reaction on that because you're the only one here. It occurs to me with a pulpit, so there you go. John, do you have something to add to this discussion?
Let's back up a couple of steps to something that Carol said earlier about the Islamic, Jewish, and Christian faiths having a sort of a common thread. I don't think that the community quite understands that, our community here. And let me just back up just a second. I don't necessarily believe that letters to the editor of a newspaper necessarily reflect the community's broad range of opinion. But the letters to the editor that we have gotten have expressed a deep mistrust of the Muslim faith in post-9/11. How do you propose to educate a public, if what you say is true, and I'm not going to quarrel or quibble with you on that, but if there is in fact, if we have more in common than we seem to understand, how do we get that through to a community that seems to, in 5 years after 9/11, seems to have a visceral distrust of at least one of our major religions?
I wish I had the answer to that. I think that people are still very afraid. I think they recognize that they're not as secure as they thought they were before. And I think sometimes they're encouraged to feel that way. I remember when they showed so many scenes of the two towers falling that they finally asked some of the television stations to quit doing that. Now, of course, I'm an educator, so I believe in education. And I think that it's going to take us a longer time to do this, but I think we have to keep talking about it, and we have to keep trying to educate people in our congregations, in our classes. We have a whole section on Islam in my humanities class, which was added to the textbook and has been expanded, certainly, since 9/11. So I think, of course, that education is the way to do that, and speaking out, and I feel an obligation to do this. And I don't know, any other better
the media has some responsibility. It might help college students to take a course, but we can't get the mass public into the classroom probably. In fact, college enrollment is actually down a bit, as it's been historically. So I think media, television, conversations like this, and even more popular media, putting out in sound bites and things. If you introduce us, if we can't all have a Islamic neighbor, introduce me to other folks' Islamic neighbors who are good citizens, who are contributing, and do it in such a way that people, in creative ways, there's no end to the media's creativity, do it in a way that interests me and pulls me in. I want to watch and want to discover. We did a thing at First Baptist Church close to after 9/11 on the Islamic faith, and we filled the room. People are interested.
Oh, yes.
And the further we get away from 9/11, the interest may go down, but because of the wars, the interest has stayed high. And so if you give those opportunities to people, they want to know. They want to know. Anybody who threatens my security or your security, we have a bias against. Anybody threatens me about anything, I'm suspicious of. But if you threaten my sense of security, then I'm ready to fight you. And our sense of security is threatened by the Islamic faith, and so you've got a ways to go to get us there. But we can get there if we'll take these avenues. I think media, and John, you can play a great role in the power that you have with your pen to get people, because people read what you write.
I want to add a couple of kudos. I think the paper has done a good job of this by the faith section, because there have been things in there about all religions, and I appreciate that. And I think the International Club is a force in Amarillo to teach us to learn about a lot of things. About other countries, and they have looked at Islamic countries and the religion as a result, and so I just want to give those people.
You would think, excuse me for talking over you, but you would think that perhaps we're smart enough to learn from history, and obviously we're not. But what about the impoundment of the Japanese during World War II? I mean, Japanese Americans were no more connected to the Japanese Empire at that time, and yet they were singled out. And I think I have to agree wholeheartedly with Dr. Batson. When people feel threatened, it's that animal instinct in us. We just pull in, and we don't want to know, we don't want to hear, and it's leadership. I mean, there's got to be leadership in the communities, and if it comes from the print media or the electronic media, or wherever it comes from, we have got to get over this.
I think it's dangerous to take a little bit of information, which I think a lot of people do, and then assume all the rest of your information. And many people do that with their own religions. I mean, you can make the Bible or the Quran or the Talmud say whatever you want it to say if you don't take it if you don't look at it in historical context.
You can defend the act of slavery in American history.
Which happens.
Or you can destroy, or you can attack the philosophy of having slaves in American history, both using scripture, and it happened.
And I think for immigrants, they also have to be more proactive, because many immigrant communities, they do not really take any initiative because they are so busy. They really work hard like anybody else, contribute to the society. And in some areas, I think they need to come out and be proactive and don't just stay behind the scene and poor me attitude. Because after 9/11, we had to go to many churches. We had to go and deliver so many talks with my colleagues. We delivered so many seminars, Amarillo, in Canyon, just to have some kind of understanding. But the problem is, as you very well mentioned, that when things are over and when things are kind of disappeared, people take it easy. So that's why I said we are still going through phase number 2, and people, they are kind of getting relaxed, and so that's where the problem is.
Ellen, I've used this line when I've presented the various programs that started out where I used to just talk off the cuff, and then it got so serious I actually had to sit down and prepare presentations, and I would tell people, especially in the groups that I spoke to at hospice training, there was a question that was asked, Jews don't believe in hospice. Well, that's just not true. Jews do believe in hospice. Well, why don't we see more Jews? I said, well, there aren't very many Jews here. It's a matter of numbers. I'm willing to bet that most of the people that go to hospice are Baptists because there are more Baptists. But I don't think that that's indicative of anything. When you talk about educating the public, it's like asking them to take a sip of water from a fully charged 2-inch fire main. And I, for one, I would love to know how to break it down into component pieces, and I really don't until we get over this separation of church and state, and I'm probably on such thin ice right now I ought to back off. But there's got to be a way of taking, if religion sets everybody off, there's simply, let's call it ethics and ethical behavior and something like that, and let's get it back in the school, and let's start, the kids, you go to a playground, and you see in this community a United Nations of children on the playground. And they're all speaking each other's languages. And they've never studied Spanish, Italian, Arabic, Hebrew, you name the language. But they're out there playing and they're getting along just fine. And that's where you get at them.
You have to teach peace. John, did you want to say something?
Only a comment. As one who works with letters to the editor, and I get them every day, and in this post-9/11 period, I've been struggling with this, probably with mixed success, at trying to guard against those who take a piece of information about a religion in this instance, and then generalize and then throw out, make a blanket statement condemning Islam in the wake of 9/11, and it's a real struggle that we have at our newspaper, trying to be gatekeepers, if you will, of this bulletin board, our community bulletin board, and but the anger that people have expressed in this period, in these past 5 years, it's almost impossible to guard against someone flying off the handle.
We only have 5 minutes left, believe it or not, but I want to get to a few more viewer questions. Buddy, if we can go to the next 4. There seems to be a lot of religious extremists now. How should we respond to them? Most world conflicts seem to arise from opposing religious beliefs. Why is that? Religious fanatics seem to recruit the uneducated. How can we work against that? And finally, why can't members of all faiths work together to fight extremists? Anybody want to tackle any of that?
I'll take a stab at one of them.
Okay,
I don't
good.
think really that most wars are based upon religion. I think most wars are based upon economics and territory, and then religion is co-opted. You can get a man to die for his faith. You might not get him to die for oil or for a piece of property. And so if you can get the soldier to somehow believe that he is fighting for his deepest values, he's willing to die. So I would just say to the viewer who asked that question that really would come right down to it. It's probably economics and land or territory that most wars are about, and religion is co-opted later.
If you ever go to any big city, you'll be surprised to see that people fight for basic resources, water, electricity. And so your comment is, social and economic prosperity, that is the main, criteria. Anytime a country doesn't have basic, resources, people fight, because at the end of the day, absolutely, at the end of the day, in this country and overseas, wherever you go, people would like to feed their kids. It does not matter how much money they make. It doesn't matter what kind of religion they have, and that's where the bottom line is. And I think United States has a very big role to play, because through World Bank, through United Nations, through International Monetary Fund, and so basically all countries can coexist, but back to square one, economic well-being.
Yeah, do we have a responsibility to help other people economically? We could go there all day. I want to address one of the questions. It says we live in a time when there are a lot of religious extremists, and what can we do about them? I am bothered by that question. What do we do about them? Are we not extremists by belonging to certain groups? I would better answer this question, what can we do about us? And sort of recognize this as going across all religions. We tend to right now single out Islam, but there are religious extremists in all religions. I think that just what you talk about, if we can continue to be open and make a statement of being open, and it will take away a little bit of the authority of these extreme positions. And to speak out against them, is that they do not represent us all.
Let me go to the last question I'm going to go to tonight, Buddy, who is our director I keep talking to. How can people of faith disagree? No. How can people of faith agree to disagree when it comes to something as personal as religion and spirituality? And I think that might be a good question. We just have a couple of minutes to have some closing thoughts about, because where do we go from here? We haven't, you've said we haven't done enough. We backed off after 9/11. Terrorists will hit again. I think that that's a given. We better be ready for it. And so, will we have the relationships formed? Will we have the knowledge that we need to have? What can we do?
I think we have to have mutual respect for each other. It's hard to agree to disagree about religion, even amongst Baptists, much less amongst world religions, because our religious beliefs are our core values, and they answer eternal questions of salvation or damnation. And so these things are not to be missed. They're important. And so if we think we're right, it makes us on edge and ready to fight. But I think the answer is that you have to give someone else. Each of our major religions at its core has a value of treating your neighbor the way you want to be treated. Each of our religions has peace as a core value, and honoring even your enemy and praying for your enemy. And so, and toleration even for minority, where there's not a separation of society and the church, even in Islamic countries, a protection of minority faith. So I think it's each of our religions gives us that core value already if we'll recognize it.
Dr. Anwar, we have less than a minute, but I'll give you the last word tonight.
I think respect, and we can all coexist. Respect, and we have walls. We need to bring down the walls. It can be in our families, in our churches, in our communities, in our anywhere. As long as we maintain walls, I think we cannot seek any progress.
Okay, I should let Steve have the final word, because I need to let all three religions talk.
Oh.
30 seconds, go.
Very quickly, a Jewish philosopher, Hillel, was greeted by a non-believer, and he was asked, if you can tell me why I should become a believer in Judaism, I'll become Jewish. And Hillel thought for a minute, and he said, do unto others as you'd have done unto you, and all the rest is commentary. And I leave that as a thought. What we're talking about is commentary, but we're talking about the lead issue of respecting everybody for who he or she is.
They're fisting me, which means we have to go. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you all being here tonight. I know it was kind of a questionable proposition to come and talk about religion on television live for an hour. So thank you very much for doing that. I hope that you enjoyed the show and that you learned something tonight that you might not have known before. If you'd like to know more about it, I have asked our guests to supply us with a list of their favorite reading materials, their favorite websites, and Carol Nicklaus's upcoming series of public lectures, which are free, by the way. And if you'd like to know that information, you can go to the website, KACV.org. Thank you very much for being here.